We're going to go now to session 3 with Dr. Bradley Malin.
Thanks. So this was a session that I moderated with Alex Melamed yesterday. And I'm going to try and bring together a couple things that we saw across various talks in a consolidated fashion. So first, I think it was pretty clear that we have the ability to formalize cancer management pathways, as well as integrate them into EHRs. That was made evident in several of the presentations. Second, not all of the information associated with pathways needs to be displayed all the time. And I think this was pretty useful because the best example of this was what was shown in Kaiser's presentation on the hover and discover concept, where you could bring the right information at the right time so that you didn't always clutter the screen for the end user. Third, non-routine events, or what you might consider deviations in care, they will happen. And I think that no matter what you do, there's always going to be a situation in which something deviates. Still, it appears that this happens in situations where there's a lack of a human-centric design. And bringing systems together, particularly considering the socio-technical interface, is necessary to ensure that these systems are well-oriented. I'll come back to that in a second. The fourth issue that was brought up was that there's a difference between a patient journey and the patient pathway. And the treatment pathway is currently integrated into the EHR, but the notion of the patient journey is somewhat lacking in that documentation. Still, that should be documented, and simply because a patient provides that information, possibly through something like a patient portal or even just an ad hoc communication, it should still be available, and it's something that could be used to facilitate what we heard talked about before, which was the learning health system. And then finally, I mentioned this a second ago, but just to make it clear, the notion of socio-technical interplay is critical because of the fact that you have dynamic systems. You have an environment in which the set of people who are interacting with the patient is going to be evolving over time. And you need to acknowledge the fact that not everybody interacts with technology in the same way. Next slide. So there were several recommendations that I believe come out of what the panelists presented. First, we need to acknowledge the fact that the pathways that a patient experience go beyond single environment, go beyond a particular care provider in a single healthcare system, and that we need interoperability between different healthcare providers and different EHR systems. And this is probably only going to happen if we have incentive structures in play to make it happen. Doesn't necessarily need to be monetary. We can think a little bit more craftily about what these incentive structures should be, but we do need to design them in order to ensure that there is a transfer of knowledge on an as-needed basis. Secondly, it's a team. And once we recognize the fact that these teams are dynamic and fluid, I think that the design of the system is going to take on a new life. And it will become less of a static environment for documentation and providing guidance on what is the next step in the pathway, and more of a collaborative environment for exchange of information. Third, we should acknowledge that deviations from pathways are going to happen, and that's okay. It's okay because of the fact that you really do have humans and you have biological behavior at play, and you're never going to have everything perfectly specified. That said, we should have the ability to document when these deviations take place and learn from those changes, because if there are patterns that occur as an artifact of these deviations, then we should be able to use that for facilitating the evolution of these systems. And I believe that that's the end of my recommendations.
Thanks, Brad.